Good evening. I'd like to call the meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission of the Town of Chesapeake Beach to order. I'd like to take roll now, and I'd like to reflect that all commissioners are present except for Commissioner Baralt. Number 2 is going to be approval of the January 25th, 2023 Planning and Zoning Agenda. I would like to first remove from the agenda number 6, critical area regulations and the discussion thereof. Do I have a second, please?
I'll second that.
All in favor? Or does anybody else have anything before I finish that? I don't see any changes on the agenda. Okay, we have a second to approve the removal of critical area regulations. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? No. Okay, number 3, approval of the minutes of the December 7th, 2022 Planning and Zoning meeting. Any changes?
Move to approve.
Any seconds? All in favor?
Aye.
Number 4 is the public hearing. So I'm going to go ahead and close the regular meeting of the Commission, Planning and Zoning Commission, and I'm going to open the public hearing on amendment to Article 5 by adding new section called Section 290-23, Findings of Compatibility, creating 7 required compatibility standards applicable to new development and regulations on their purpose, applicability, and administration. Mr. Jakubiec, could we have a staff report? I'm sorry, I see nobody in the office, in the audience, so I'm going to go ahead and close unless I have anybody on the dais who wants to speak as a member of the audience. No? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the public hearing, and I'm going to bring it back, and I'm going to ask for a staff report from Mr. Jakubiec, please.
Hey, thank you. This is a set of standards that has been drafted and reviewed, but not in depth yet by the Planning Commission, but just generally, and it reflects an effort to bring standards into the code that try to make new buildings compatible with their surroundings, so there's a better fit and a more uniform pattern of development within communities. This would apply to all projects that generate a need for a site plan, all building projects that generate a need for a site plan. And that means that if it's a non-residential project, like a commercial building or some institutional building, or a multifamily building or a townhouse building, those compatibility standards would be administered by you, the Planning Commission. If it's a single-family house or an accessory structure on an existing lot, accessory use, excuse me. So if a gasoline station were adding a car wash, that would be an accessory use, and that would trigger the compatibility findings. But if it's I guess what I was saying was if it's simply a single family dwelling, then that's reviewed as a Category 2 site plan, and it would be the zoning administrator who would apply the standards in that case. So that's the gist of it. There are 7 standards in all, and under each standard, the draft as proposed includes an explanation statement for administrative guidance. And while that statement is not the standard or the finding itself, it clearly says what, or the intent is that the standard ought to be applied as described in that statement. So it is relevant, and it would be part of the code if adopted. So I see that Commissioner Baralt has submitted changes or proposed changes and additions to this, and I'm available to talk about that whenever the Commission would like, and have some thoughts.
Okay. Are there any general questions? Because what I would like to do is come back section by section and go through each one. But if there are general questions for Mr. Kubiak?
No,
Commissioner
I have
Rutke?
none.
Commissioner Blackwelder, I'm losing my mind here tonight. Blackwelder, would you have any?
One or two. The first question is, are there any concerns with the words like aesthetically when it comes to compatibility studies, or compatibility findings like there were with the previous code that we reviewed?
Not generally. If there's any specific reference to that word, we could look at it individually just to get all eyes on it again.
Mhm.
When we say aesthetics, it imparts a certain amount of vagueness. So if there's nothing to back up what you mean by aesthetics, then it's problematic. But if the intent is to establish what needs to be found in order for something to meet the approval, and those findings are fairly clear, then we're okay.
Okay, so it's fine to use in the context of compatibility. It's fine to use aesthetically as a word because you describe what would be aesthetically compatible
Yes, that's
in
my
your
thinking.
directions to us.
That's right. But
Okay.
if there's a specific reference to where I use that term, I wouldn't mind looking at it now. I mean, I just want to make sure that we're all comfortable again because.
No, it was suggested by Kathleen, and I just wanted to make sure
Oh.
that
Okay.
it's legally, appropriate and can be used. And then I guess my other question, I brought it up last meeting, was we do need to make findings in order to make a determination. So we would need to retain the word findings
Yeah. I
within
think
our
so.
code.
The term findings is kind of a term of art in this business. I mean, I don't know if Larry might comment whether it applies to all kind of administrative type of hearings and decision making, but in terms of planning and zoning, we're always asked to make findings and state findings and record them, and they become the basis for making a decision and the basis for defending your decision as well. So that's why I like the word finding, as opposed to determinations, which
Mhm.
does imply a decision.
Mhm.
Okay. Those were my only questions off the bat. And I might have more about just basic word. I've been working on a contract all day, and all these little words are, they're important. So,
Thank you. Commissioner Brown.
Yeah, I have a lot of questions. Basically, I don't understand why we need this. I don't know what the problem is that we're trying to solve. And since there isn't a problem that I can articulate and specify, I don't know how this solves the problem that we don't know is there. That's my first issue. And generally, I find adding to the code be a big deal. And we shouldn't be just willy-nilly adding to the code unless we have a specific objective and reason to do that. And I find it wanting in this case. Going to the word aesthetically is on my list. The dictionary says it gives pleasure through beauty. I don't know how I can find an objective standard for finding pleasure through beauty. It's in the eyes of the beholder as I see it. Going back to a specific example, the only specific example I can think of is the one that Commissioner Brault brought up for her neighborhood. She's not here to talk about it, and she has a long list of things that she would like to have changed, and she's not here to defend those. So I'll make a motion to defer discussion or approval of this, or discuss approval of this until Commissioner Brault is here.
Okay, all right, any discussion on that? Commissioner Kell, sorry. About this particular motion? Deferring the discussion.
Well, she provided her comments that she wanted us to take into consideration, knowing that she was not here. So since she already provided her comments and her input, I would say we move forward.
Any additional comment? Commissioner Buckley?
She did provide, she was very clear in my mind about the problem she was having on B Street. And I personally think we know her feelings about it, her thoughts about it, so. I think we move forward.
I would agree with that sentiment. I think we all understand what Kathleen is trying to get at and her position on things. And I think the trick is just to work with Chris to make sure that these compatibility standards hold up legally and are something that will ensure the enjoyment of the neighborhoods that are existing and are going to receive development.
I think I would agree with other commissioners that think that not only does Commissioner Brault have a lot of concerns about her own street and her own area, but now we have other areas that are being impacted by houses that don't seem to fit on that street. And people are concerned that the cottages are going to be all torn down and these mishmash of different types of structures are going to be built, so that we're going to have all of the older homes. Of course, it won't apply to any of the HOAs that are already built, but all the older homes, and I've seen it in other communities in the West where you've taken out all the historical characteristics, no designs that seem similar or compatible. So every street feels like there's no harmony to it, or no theme to the town, no identity that you can recognize any longer with Chesapeake Beach. So I think there was a lot of concern about not having these compatibility findings. And I know that Commissioner Brault did give us, and in fact, we've had two different meetings now. We've had her concerns and her desires to make some changes, but her desire to try and get this through. It's very important to her. It's important to me as well, just because I like a more harmonious feel, and I think that the town needs a theme or some kind of retention of that historical feeling that we've had when I first moved here. It was really important to me, and I hate to see it go. So let's go ahead and vote on the motion to take this to the next meeting. All in favor of taking it to the next meeting, which is what his motion was, say aye. Opposed? Okay, that particular motion is defeated. So I just wanted to ask Commissioner Hahn, do you have any questions for Mr. Jakubiec about any of this generally, not about each specific item, but generally about the idea of this compatibility findings?
No, I do not.
Okay, then what we're going to do is we're going to come back.
Chairman Greengold, can I
Yes. Yes.
finish some of my questions?
Oh, I'm so sorry. Go ahead. Yes.
I guess first, if you have specific examples of this compatibility, I think it would be helpful to this commission to have that specificity so that we know whether these changes address that issue. So, and frankly, I think when we talk about changing the code, we should be doing a workshop with an example or two or more so that we can see whether the changes we're proposing actually fix the problem that we think we have. So if you can identify those specific things, I'd appreciate it. The title, Chris, Findings, I think fails to identify what we're really talking about here. We're talking about standards, right? I mean, it's not someone who picks up the code and says, let's see, I want to make a change to my house, or I want to build a duplex. He's not going to go to a section called findings. I mean, findings means you've completed the review, and these are the results of the review. That's a court's findings are the result of the court hearing, not the beginning of the court hearing. So I think the name is wrong. In it, also, you passed out this,
That was from me, actually. That's mine.
so is this your change? Okay. So,
My
all
comments.
right, so we'll
Sorry.
get to that. But in this document, the only thing it calls for is making findings, a written report. We haven't done written reports in the past that I can recall. When we did the schoolhouse over here, when we did other site plans, we haven't had written reports. But what you're proposing is that we now have a written report. Who's going to write that report?
Staff would write that.
You would write that.
Yeah.
Because that's something new. And how does all that it calls for in this proposal is that we have findings. It doesn't say what the result of those findings are. It doesn't say that 6 out of 7 you approve, or you have to have all 7. It doesn't say it affects the approval of the site plan.
Right.
It's just findings, which I find to be rather ambiguous. Also, it talks about category 2 site plans, which are designated for you to review. But category 2 site plans, they don't require architectural drawings. I mean, that's according to our code. So do we need to change the code to require architectural drawings for category 2 so that you can review it?
We routinely get building elevation drawings. We're asked for them as a condition for site plan approval for a house, or it typically is a single family house.
Yeah, that may be, but it's not in the code. So you might think about a change to the code.
Yeah.
And then we include this under dimensional requirements, Article 5. There's more here than dimensional requirements. Seems to me that the article we approved in the last public hearing about townhouses had a more appropriate title, Design Standards for Townhouses. That's what you're talking about here.
Right.
Design standards for all kinds of things. So the title, the content, I found most of the, the standards that are listed here to be pretty subjective as opposed to objective standards. And that makes it difficult for the public to execute when you've got subjective standards subject to which commissioners show up on the day of the hearing. For example, what is it, number 5, I think, talks about obstructing the view of the vista or something. I'm trying to conceptualize how that's executed. Somebody has a vacant lot over here and he wants to build something. Well, I can give you an example. Right along the waterfront, next to what used to be Susie Collier's house, they rebuilt that property, the vacant lot next to it. And the neighbors objected, so they didn't get to build on that. Is that the kind of thing you're talking about? So we can never build on any vacant lot because it'll obstruct the vista of the person behind it who wants to look out at the Chesapeake Bay. It's that kind of ambiguity that I find troubling in this document. Let's see. Frankly, I see it as unnecessary. The comprehensive plan, I forgot to bring my copy with me, but compatibility or compatible, the word is used, I think, 12 times. I don't remember some of the pages. But the one that stuck out to me is Appendix 1, page 3. And I have it marked in my book, but I'll read it here anyway. I'll just do it from memory. The Appendix 1 lists previous objectives from the last comprehensive plan, not the current one, the previous one, and were they achieved, partially achieved, or not achieved. And it lists compatibility as being achieved. And then in another place, it says partially achieved because we had the floating bonus zones, which we've now eliminated. So that one I would assume is achieved. So if we achieved compatibility with the last comprehensive plan, and we take credit for it in this comprehensive plan, I don't know why we're considering this thing here. And finally, to go back to Ms. Baralt, who I would like to debate with, but she isn't here. The issue that she brought up was the house built next to her.
Yes.
No,
No, a couple houses down on a,
yeah, that was
couple of them.
ugly or something. And the question was asked, well, how did that get approved? And the answer was it went to the Board of Appeals, which has a section on this subject, which we aren't amending by these proposals. And she was asked, did she attend that hearing? And she said, yes, she did. Did she object to it? No, she didn't. I mean, it went through a process. I'm not sure how the process could be reinforced or bulked up besides having it go to appeal on the issue of the building. It was not approved by you because it had to go to the Board of Appeals. They considered the subject. The residents, the neighbors didn't come and object, didn't state their case, and the Board of Appeals said, looks okay to me. That process is in place, section 290-12. And so I'm not sure why we have this. And the final thing of the criteria that the Board of Appeals looks at is this proposal in compliance with the town's comprehensive plan? So it seems to me the subject's already covered. So I'll be voting against this tonight because I see no reason.
Kubiak, do you have any responses to all these concerns of
Sure.
Commissioner Brown's?
Sure, there's a lot there. Thank you, Commissioner Brown, for that critical evaluation. I'll say that I think the focus on the title is appropriate, and I don't know why I was actually thinking findings, but standards of compatibility are fine. I mean, that's in fact what is listed here as standards. I guess I was thinking more of the administration as I wrote the title rather than the actual standards itself. And including the word standards rather than findings does make it consistent with the previous set of standards that the commission adopted. So Larry, you began discussing the problem that these standards would seek to address. And in many respects, the problem is inherent in the way the code is, and on many levels, the town is grateful that it has not been presented with starkly incompatible development in certain residential areas to date, where it could have been. And I think the most consequential proposals are likely to be more intensive redevelopment of existing houses in neighborhoods already built up with houses. And those houses can take a decidedly different approach to building. In the RV2 district, townhouses are allowed as well as multifamily structures. So they easily could adopt models of building that have no precedent within Chesapeake Beach. And with a process that requires a developer and the planning commission to go through and evaluate all the physical elements that define character, it helps shape the form of the building into something that's more compatible. So this is an attempt to prevent, in many cases, what could be a worst case scenario, but it's also meant to improve the overall design of new structures within the town. It may be that, in many respects, this is kind of modeled on the actual experience we took with the Board of Education, kind of behind the scenes with their architectural team and engineering team, met with us here in town. We had a lot of discussion. I said, we don't have design standards. They asked, well, what are your designs? We don't, but do an evaluation of all the major buildings in town, the ones that you as an architect think help define the vernacular architecture, and then we'll talk about it. And they came out with a bunch of photographs and we looked at it. So they adopted, they incorporated those into the physical building. They didn't have to do that. They did that because we're working with a friendly government that wants to build a school, and they had a really good architect who was thoughtful, but they didn't have to be. And I know from experience that it's a rare developer that will take the time to do that. And so it is possible that you can introduce within the town projects that would be really adverse to neighboring properties. And the town's zoning is premised to some degree on there being a mix of uses within certain zones. And this has, for me, from the very beginning, when the Planning Commission was doing the comprehensive plan, has sort of been the relief valve that was necessary in order to get some mixing of uses into some of these zones. And mixing of uses are really only allowed, I think, within the RV2 district. But this also hedges against really poor residential design too. And there are some examples in town that having said really poor, I can't say an address right now, but there've been recent examples where I wish we had standards, and I wish I could have said to a builder, these are the standards, go through this process, present to me why you think this building is compatible with the neighborhood, because it clearly isn't. So that's what this seeks to achieve. And these standards are, this is not novel or new. Jurisdictions do use this type of approach. And in fact, I should say that I borrowed from other jurisdictions to think through how they fit for Chesapeake Beach. The Category 2 site plans in town actually do require building elevations or building plans that these drawings will illustrate the appearance of the structure / building upon completion. So that's in section 290-24C. So we do have that. While it's not elevated in importance, that's why I sort of defaulted to my experience. Like, yeah, we always get those drawings. They're not always the architectural drawings, Larry, like you would expect with a commercial project. In fact, sometimes they're even hand-drawn, but that's the approach the town council has taken to sort of be more forgiving of the mom and pop type of developments. But we always get something. We always insist on something. And the Board of Appeals, so they're administering very strict standards for granting variances. And those variances are listed in state law, and they really have very little to do with actual compatibility in the way that these standards are drafted. I think the board could say, we are not going to issue your variance. We're not going to allow your building to be closer to that side yard because you're presenting this big, stark, blank wall. And if you were 8 feet away, like you should be, we wouldn't have a comment on it. But if you're so close, we're going to require you to break the mass of that wall down with some porches or windows. They typically don't. It's just not typically the forum. I'm hoping that over time, this new Board of Appeals will engage at that level. They certainly will if these types of standards come into place, even though it's not their job to administer them. It's their job to make sure that a project meets the code. So they may approve something, approve a variance, and the condition of the approval is that the building meet the standards for compatibility. So the applicant, once they have the variance, will have to go through the zoning permit stage and demonstrate to the zoning administrator that the standards are met. So I don't know, candidly, how effective these would be in addressing Kathleen's comments. I don't know if her changes actually materially make this more effective to address her particular issues. And from my kind of professional judgment, there are a lot of elements in that building that actually make it work in that context, even though it's different, but it's bigger. And the things that she's most concerned about, and I understand her concerns, are not going to be addressed through this as much as the basic standards that allow you to fill up a lot with a lot of building space. You can go to 8 feet to either side, 15 to the front and 30 feet from the back, and then go up 35 feet. That creates a giant volume within which to put a box and call it a house. That's the reality. And that's just what it, so when the market is strong and people want to be there, they don't want to build a small house. They're going to build a house that really suits them. And that's what you have. But it will require that a developer go through the exercise of actually evaluating them. And if it does go to the Board of Appeals, it'll be a public discussion of these standards. It won't be just administering them as the zoning administrator. They'll be presented. And any board member can say, as part of your requirement to meet the code, tell me how you're going to meet the design compatibility standards. And the developer could address those issues, and the board could condition its approval on changes that are relevant. I think by and large, this is a kind of an entry way into general design standards. These, or more specific design standards, I should say. As I mentioned on many occasions, we're just not there yet, in my view, to do this really good design standards, although we did the multifamily townhouse standards, but the ones that Cindy has talked about, more of an architectural type of kind of creating a theme and a unified sense of building materials and all that, that takes a lot of time. And that is something you really want to engage with individual property owners. We really want to set, like if we were doing that, I would imagine boards here in the town hall that would be here for 6-10 months. People would have a chance to comment on it and understand what the architecture is of a coastal community in Maryland. That's not where we are. We just want to make sure that basic compatibility of buildings can be advanced and incompatibilities can be avoided. But there might be some areas in here, I admit, that you might think, God, preserving a view, that really opens up a can of worms at Chesapeake Beach. But I think there is really prescient point here is about what this says about what you can do once you've made your findings. And I was thinking to myself, as I was reading through those, I think maybe there needs to be a statement here about, I mean, it does reference compliance with these standards is blah, 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 and compliance, but it doesn't say the planning commission shall find that these standards have been complied with in order to approve a project. It leaves that out. I don't know why that is. It's probably just an oversight on my part. But while Larry was talking, I read in a couple of places that, compliance with compatibility standards shall not be grounds, blah, blah. So I assumed this, but without saying it. And I think it's worthwhile. If we go forward with this in this form, we add a section under administration of, what's it mean? I mean, what do you do once you've made your findings?
Usually, once you make your findings, when it's written up, there's a recommendation that you should be following.
Yeah, but there's so many other things you're considering too, in any site plan. These are a set of standards, but you can meet these standards and still have to meet the critical area standards, the various bulk and dimension standards of the building, the stormwater management, all these other items. So it's one of multiple criteria that have to be evaluated. Excuse me. So anyway, there is comment, especially about that point, is giving me pause a little bit, and I'm kind of thinking now where you might add a paragraph or statement to address that. And I think that's it. That's my
Okay.
comments.
All right, then let's go ahead and start with the first section, which is section A, purpose and defining criteria. Now, of course, staff report has a small purpose. And then, of course, Commissioner Brault extended it. And there are certain things in there that probably should be changed anyway from how she explains certain things. And then I went ahead and made another one. So if you see this other piece of paper that's loose, I have another change in number A. And the capital letters are the words that are changed again. So I kind of thought that what Commissioner Brault did was a little bit lengthy. So I kind of consolidated what she said into something a little, but I thought that what you had, Mr. Jakubiec, was a little bit short and terse.
Mhm.
So I kind of just added a little bit of what she said, what you said, and then I kind of consolidated. And if everybody will allow me to say what I said, then maybe if you remember what Commissioner Brault said, maybe it kind of brings it all together. And I added to what was in here. I added to what Mr. Jakubiec said. I included in the town of Chesapeake Beach, which is what Commissioner Brault wants. So at the end, I added the town of Chesapeake Beach. And then I added also compatibility standards provide a sense of cohesiveness and community, as well as promote the historic and environmental features related to our unique natural setting, as outlined in the town's comprehensive plan. The lack of maintaining compatibility standards within a neighborhood can lead to visual clutter and a sense of disharmony. And I think that kind of is the gist of what she was trying to say. And I don't know if that is complete enough or if you think it changes things too much, Mr. Jakubiec. And if anybody has any thoughts as to whether or not it does say everything that Commissioner Brault was trying to say as well. Would like to make a comment about that or a question about that. Letter A, purpose and defining criteria. Commissioner Rutke, let's start with you.
I think, I'd like to start with a question. The house that Kathleen is talking about is an enormous glass modern structure. Would that fit in here or not? I mean, this is very general and sounds very nice, but you have to be able to bring it down to a working level where you can say, yes, it made sense, or no, it didn't make sense. And I'm just asking because, we have another one over here, a little modern house that just got built. And what are we saying? Are we saying no modern houses? I mean, I really need to know because it makes a difference as to what I think about what you put in here. So what's our goal here?
That's a good question. And the question is, do we want to answer that question in the purpose and defining criteria, or do we want to do that in the administration and the details of it in the heart of the standards? I mean, that would be my question. Mr. Jakubiec, what are your
Yeah.
thoughts?
I don't think that the planning commission should be making style decisions. But you can have a perfectly modern house that blends with the community if you meet these compatibility standards, because they focus on objective things like the proportion, scale, massing of the building, use of fenestration and breaking the mass down, and porches and the like. So, you know, I guess perhaps that's part of what I was referring to when I was mentioning that even with compatibility standards, you can still have a style of architecture that may not be, consistent with the post-war sort of cottage style housing. I mean, but by the same token, you can have a house that has all the relevant physical attributes of the standard American house or cottage, and arrange them in a way that looks awful. And there are examples here, and that's what these would prevent. And so, for instance, if you go up 35 feet with a sheer wall, you've met the code by definition. The houses alongside of you are 18 feet tall, each 22 foot tall. All of a sudden, your house stands out as an incompatible pattern.
You're talking about a flat roof.
It could be flat, or it could be.
Well, can't be not according to the code that we approved. Right? We can't, didn't we say there would be no flat roofs? There must be a certain
It's,
slope to the roof. So you can't have a 35-foot wall.
I actually think that was only in a section related to multifamily and townhouse.
35 feet as a max. But in any case, say it's 30 feet, call it 30 feet straight, or maybe it's just 28 feet. But it's easy with some basic standards then to step that top floor back a little bit. You step it back, then what you see is a more of a continuous pattern of smaller scale structures. Or you break that tall mass with a real porch that breaks it down. And the porch aligns with the general kind of one-story pattern of the other houses. So there's various approaches that can be followed. And that's what these lead to. So in answer to your question, you can have all the various elements of traditional architecture and do a structure that doesn't look like it belongs at all. Or you could be have a different style of housing, a modern style, and really nice, have a nice blend, and actually could fit quite well. So I don't know that you want to go and say no modern houses,
right.
or even apply these in a way that's kind of is arbitrarily against a modern expression. Does it have a door? Is the mass broken down? Does it have porches? All those things are what make for compatible residential architecture.
So going back to the purpose and defining criteria,
Yep.
we're trying to stay broad. We're trying to just bring in the ideas of what the comprehensive plan maybe give us as an idea, and maybe what standards might apply to, but not be specific about design, certain types of housing, whatnot. But again, if we look at what was originally given to us in the staff report, and then we look at the, I really think that Commissioner Baralt put a lot of effort into this, and as you see, a lot of detail. And I was just trying to, with mine, trying to encompass all of her detail into a more broad definition, but yet it was a little more detailed than yours, Mr. Jakubiec, just because I thought that we wanted to bring in the idea of the sense of community and all that. Just because when you go in, and since I've been in other towns with planning commissions, I know that compatibility is a really important feature in planning nowadays. And if you go onto the internet, they're listed there as far as how people want to have compatibility. And the whole idea is to reduce the visual clutter, try to make a sense of harmony and compatibility. And I think that needs to be included. You talk about aesthetically complement the neighborhood, but again, I'm not sure if we want to use that term aesthetically complement the neighborhood, or it says, and landscape features of new development that I think complement. I don't think it has to be aesthetically complement. So I would remove that word. Actually, I took that word out of it just because, as you've heard, it's a little bit vague and subjective. I guess all of this really is, but as you've said, there are ways that architects have of making things look smaller, making things look more like what the original neighborhood looks like, and I think that's what we're trying to head towards.
Can I suggest
Yes.
some rewording? Rather than saying compatibility standards provide a sense of community, really a cohesiveness, standards don't. But the intent of the standards is to. So since this is a purpose statement, can we say the purpose of, or the intent is to provide a sense of cohesiveness and community in the built environment or something like that, in buildings?
So you want to say, okay, so if you want to, so how do you want to do this? You want to take yours or you want to take mine and redo it? How do you want to do that?
It's just yours. Just
Okay.
Your paragraph.
So so then where it starts with the compatibility standards, how do you want to readdress that?
Just add another statement. The purpose is also to.
So at the end of what I included, you want to have another sentence?
No, I'll put a period at the end of the word Chesapeake Beach,
Oh, okay.
and then I delete the word compatibility standards, and I'd say the purpose is also. In other words, the purpose of the standards is also to, and I think it's probably promote rather than provide, promote a sense of cohesiveness and community in.
I use the word promote there.
Yeah. Okay. Well, sense is the purpose is to provide a sense of cohesiveness and community. You mean community design? I mean, right? The buildings. You might say cohesiveness among buildings within the community, as well as promote the historic environmental features related to the, et cetera. It's all good there. I guess the only thing the focus here is to say the compatibility standards don't provide a sense, but the intent is that they're used to promote or to provide.
Okay, okay,
What
so
if we reverse those two clauses or thoughts and just started with purpose of the standards is also to promote the historic and environmental features related to our unique natural settings as outlined in the town's comprehensive plan, and thereby promoting a sense of cohesiveness and community through site planning design.
okay, so
Easier to write if you start with the historic.
all right, so you want to start with the purpose of the standards is to promote the historic. Okay, so the purpose of the compatibility standards.
For the second sentence, the first sentence that Chris wrote remains, correct?
Except you want to take out aesthetically, or do you want to leave them in there?
If it's fine to leave, then I think we can leave it. If it's legally fine.
I also was questioning that term.
Rip it out. Rip it.
Leave it?
Pull the Band-Aid off. Pull it out. No, let's get rid of it.
I thought we should.
Yeah,
I
just
really
keep
thought
it.
it was kind of
Yep.
subjective as well.
Okay.
Have you rewritten all of it or no? Okay,
I didn't
so,
rewrite all of it.
so the purpose of the compatibility center is also to,
Promote, and then everything you wrote about historic.
okay, and then at the end,
Thereby providing, thereby providing for a sense of cohesiveness and community through site plan design. Or if the provide doesn't work. rephrase that some way.
okay, I keep rewriting and rewriting, so it's a tough time to rewrite something right now.
Yeah.
Do you
I
have
keep-
to? Do you have to have thereby a sense of cohesiveness and community? Can you just eliminate that?
No, we
I
can
don't
eliminate
think
it
it's
if you
needed.
think that is not necessary. Except that, let's see, I want to make sure that Commissioner Brault has also been, has everybody read what she has taken a lot of time and effort to do? And
I noticed a sentence that I do like that she wrote at the very end. And it says, compatibility is achieved when adjacent land uses differing in functions, scale. I added the word massing and intensity do not create adverse effects on one another. And then I did write or aesthetic disharmony, but if we're getting rid of aesthetic, then we can get rid of that part too. Or disharmony, just plain disharmony.
does create adverse effects upon one another? Is that succinct enough to try and provide the idea that we want to have, that it doesn't have a negative impact on the again, it's back to,
That's subjective.
well,
We are being subjective.
it is a subjective, discussion. It really is. I mean, but a lot of what we do is subjective. I mean, when it comes down to it, I think.
May I make a quick point about this overview of subjectivity within these standards? So we are talking about redevelopment. Somebody is already, has an economic use for the properties in the RV2 area specifically. And as I've advocated before, other towns have a whole process through a floating zone where you can't even get a development in unless you go through a board, unless somebody maps it. Otherwise, you're stuck with what you got. So this is generous, and then we're saying, okay, the code allows it, but please be compatible. I think Chris is really trying to get some standards in place that will, as he said, avoid the worst case scenario. And I think that in some cases, we should be allowed to be subjective according to these standards. That's what these standards are for. And there are worst case scenarios that could happen if we don't have any subjectivity allowed to us. And putting these up front in the code will discourage people from even trying. I don't have the expertise to know how they would function. We don't have anything else, so we have to trust Chris to a degree. But to say that we shouldn't be subjective at all, or we can't be subjective, when we're talking about redevelopment that's not even necessary in many cases, I reject that argument. I think that if we are going to receive development, that we have a right to demand that it is development that people will appreciate. It's development that will improve the town of Chesapeake Beach and people will be grateful for. So
Can I just give you an opinion on this whole subjective?
Yes, please.
To the extent possible, we want to be as objective as possible.
Sure.
But the standards have to be applied. They're applied by humans. They're applied by law, by planning commission members who are selected from the communities in which they live. So that's the subject. In other words, you have a set of values that derive from the place you live in and you know about, and that's why you administer them. But we aim to be as objective as possible. And that's why we kind of labored over the paragraphs that describe how you administer this. If you administer them in a way that's counter to those statements, then you're getting to subjectivity, and I'm going to want to rein you back, or the developer's lawyer will. You want to stay focused on as close as you can, adhere to the standards. The subjectivity comes in the sense that you bring your own values, your community values, and you're kind of fighting for your community as you administer these. I know it's basically saying the same thing, but
That's what I meant.
I don't want the record to say that we can decide whatever we want or say what we like just because we like it.
Right.
Yeah.
That's kind of my point. Like our code should allow us to demand what we value.
Okay, so
But the law requires that it be something based upon some objective criteria. Now, it's unlikely, I think, that anybody's going to take us to court. But if they did, the law would look for an objective criteria that we imposed. If it was viewed as subjective, it would be capricious and probably thrown out.
Right. And I think that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to develop standards for which we can measure findings against and come to a determination. I mean, we're not the only town that does it.
Well, you argued subjectivity before, and I'm saying that
Well,
it's not.
I
you-
used
you
the
need
wrong
to-
word.
You need to erase that word from your vocabulary.
Yes, thank you. I will. I did use the wrong word in that case. But like I said, with the floating zone, it's the findings are based on a public hearing and what the community says. So this is a much lower standard than that. And we're talking about things like massing. We're talking about we're talking about very objective things in our standards.
okay, I have sort of rewritten this. I don't know if I can reread it to allow you guys to hear it and understand what I've written, but can I make an attempt to try and I have to make some changes in yours. For example, the findings, we're going to take out that word and we're going to put in the purpose of requiring compatibility standards. Does that sound better to you, Mr. Kubiak? The purpose of requiring compatibility standards or standards of compatibility?
Fair enough. But as long as we know that how you apply these matters and we'll be establishing findings, a judge will be able to read what you're saying about these standards. You'll say, we find that the pattern of development activity historically in this neighborhood is defined by two-story buildings with traditional walk-ups and side yards that are blah, 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 blah. And therefore, we find this particular building, while it's somewhat different in styling, is generally compatible. And that's why we found this standard is met. Next standard. I mean, in other words, you're going to have steps. So it's okay to say, kind of lean more towards to saying standards, but know that administratively, you're going to be establishing findings of fact. And at least while I'm helping the planning commission, I want to insist that you really do it. And even when we go into site plan stage, I really want to take you through that more thoughtful statement of findings of fact as you approve all projects. But
So requiring 4 findings of compatibility, is that findings?
I mean, the way that you say this technically, the purpose of requiring standards and the purpose of applying standards and requiring findings.
The purpose of requiring finding for compatibility standards, I'm still a
The
little,
purpose of applying
or requiring,
standards,
applying
applying and
Okay.
requiring findings of compatibility.
Purpose of applying
Standards.
standards of compatibility.
And requiring findings of compatibility. In other words, you're promising to establish findings. You're promising to go through a very thoughtful way of
Findings.
deciding how you came to a decision.
Okay. The purpose of applying standards and requiring findings of compatibility
Yeah.
is to ensure the site planning, building design, and landscape features of new development complement the neighborhood within which they are proposed.
Good.
Then, in the town of Chesapeake Beach, let's just include that. I know that Kathleen wanted that as well. In the town of Chesapeake Beach. I think she just wanted to formalize that in the code, just make it sound more. Oh, well, we can ask our, we can ask our town planner. Is that superfluous? Do we take that out?
Yeah, it's not necessary.
Okay, then we'll take that out. Why add anything we don't need? Okay. Then we have these standards should promote the historic and environmental features related to our unique natural setting as
Got it.
outlined in the town's comprehensive plan. And then should we add the last part of, did you want to add the last part of Kathleen's then? Compatibility is achieved when adjacent land uses differing in function, scale, and intensity do not create adverse impacts or effects upon one another? Said you thought that was an important
I
one.
like that statement a lot.
Okay.
Because it answers my question
Okay.
in terms
It
of.
doesn't create adverse impacts or effects.
Create adverse effects upon one another or disharmony within established communities.
Well, disharmony, again, that phrase bothers me because, again, it's not something you could define.
Okay,
And we have to define. And that's why the reason I like that statement is it answers the question that I had, that when you wrote promote the historic and environmental features related, et cetera, I'm thinking, well, what is that? Does that eliminate a certain house style? And her standard addresses that that you want to build a modern house, that's great. But there are certain things about that modern house that need to be met, I guess.
okay, so then the last sentence would be Commissioner Baralt's, and that would be compatibility is achieved when adjacent land uses differing in function, scale, and intensity
It's funny you wrote that.
do not create adverse effects upon one another. Mr. Kubiak?
Something troubles me a little bit in terms of the context of the standards, but I like it as a statement. I'm fine. Maybe we'll get a chance once this is all typed up to look at it one. Well, we will, I guess, right?
Okay, so then we'll add that compatibility is achieved when adjacent land uses differing in function. I don't know it's necessarily different in function, though. It may not differ in function, so that may be a little confusing. But differing in function, scale, and intensity do not create adverse effects upon one another. We'll go ahead and include that and just.
I guess the only thing I'm thinking is that it almost sets up this sort of land use analysis where one use impacts another. But this is all about, it's not about that. It's about the appearance and.
Right, so it's not about land use,
It's-
about the function
right.
necessarily, but it is about scale and intensity and aesthetic. I mean, it is about aesthetics, I guess, when you come down to it.
I mean, it could simply say adverse visual effects or adverse architectural effects, or maybe not. Maybe we don't need to say that. Maybe it's implied that this whole thing is about compatibility of design, buildings, and sites. Maybe it's unnecessary. Maybe I'm just reaching too far.
Being too picky on
Yes,
this.
and too picky.
Well, then let's just take the entire sentence and
Yeah,
then,
yeah.
so compatibility is achieved when adjacent land uses differing in function, scale, and intensity do not create adverse effects upon one another.
That is, do you need to put the purpose in your sentence, the second sentence? You need to add the purpose of the standards.
No, I thought we were going to take that out, right?
I don't remember. I thought it was recommended that it go into the second sentence. But if it doesn't matter.
All right, so let me reread what I think we have. and Let's just see if it's what our clerk has, Madam Clerk has. The purpose, the purpose of applying standards and requiring findings of compatibility is to ensure the site planning, building design, and landscape features of new development complement the neighborhood within which they are proposed, period. You have that part so far? These standards should promote the historic and environmental features related to our unique natural setting as outlined in the town's comprehensive plan. Compatibility is achieved when adjacent land uses differing in function, scale, and intensity do not create adverse effects upon one another.
That's what I was getting at too. That's kind of where I was headed to, and but
In the interest of moving forward, at the end of the last meeting, we deleted everything after do not and inserted the word conflict. So we got rid of create adverse effects upon someone else.
it's in the minutes.
Actually, a conflict, it's aesthetically, I guess is what we were trying to, I'm trying to figure out. So do we want to modify that last sentence then, or
Yeah, do not conflict with each other. Is that what,
do not conflict aesthetically, do not conflict?
I think it's fine.
So instead of do not create adverse effects, do not conflict architecturally, or that's not appropriate.
Maybe it's
It's the same problem,
yeah.
is what do you mean by that? It's just so broad. Who says what adverse, can a neighbor come in and say, this has an adverse effect on my house simply because they don't like something about it, or?
Well, that's why that last sentence is a little challenging.
Yeah.
Maybe we should have stopped before that. Maybe we don't get into that sentence. Because that is a little bit more subjective, I guess, than any of the other part of it.
Well, maybe rather than saying do not adverse, it sort of creates this sort of negative. Why not say compatibility is achieved when adjacent land uses differing in function, scale, and intensity fit well with each other? Or fit
I like that.
That's better.
form a cohesive whole, or reinforce each other, reinforce what's best about each other's design. I mean, that's what we're getting at.
Reinforce design elements of in the community, or reinforce
Make a good fit. I mean, this is
the last one of.
this is a purpose statement. This
Kathleen's.
is not the standard itself.
No,
So
I
we
know,
don't
we're
have to
just
be
getting
so-
on the purpose, but I think the purpose is very important for
Right.
somebody to read. So compatibility is achieved when adjacent land uses differing in function, scale, and intensity
Complement each other.
complement one another, complement.
Complement
Looks like they
the
belong. in the same
community in
neighborhood.
which they are proposed, or complement the neighborhood.
Neighborhood.
The adjacent properties. Or the neighborhood, let's just say the neighborhood, the surrounding neighborhood. Okay. Let's see if Madam Clerk can read it back to us. All right, can you read that back to us so we can get another feel for that one? So let you
Sharon.
read
I'll
it
give a
now,
Try here. From the very beginning.
please.
Okay, the purpose of applying standards and requiring findings of compatibility is to ensure that the site plannings, building design, and landscape features of new development complement the neighborhood within which they are proposed. These standards should promote the historical, environmental features related to our unique natural setting as outlined in the town's comprehensive plan. Compatibility is achieved when adjacent land uses differing in function, scale, and intensity complement the surrounding neighborhood.
I would change promote historic, not historical, promote historic and environmental.
Okay.
We have used complement twice. We've used it up on the top of that paragraph and then at the end. Did we want to change the secondary complement? Or do we just want to use the word complement throughout? How about, I'm fine with it, with the way it
It's
is.
complimentary.
Complimentary. Okay, you want to keep it?
Start with it and then.
I think it sounds pretty good, and I think it achieves all of what Kathleen wanted and what staff reported. Does anybody else have anything they want to say about that particular? Commissioner Hahn, what do you think?
I like it.
And Commissioner Brown? Commissioner Rutke?
Well, I like it. It doesn't answer Larry's question about why if it's handled some other place, is that what you're saying, Larry? So you're saying it's in the comprehensive plan and
But when I'm looking at regulations, I don't go to the comprehensive plan. I go to the regulations.
Directed to the
No,
comprehensive.
you
plan
don't go to the
once.
comprehensive plan,
In
and
any
you don't
site
go to
plan
Board of
review.
Appeals. You have to go to where Mr. Jakubiec is going to say, look at the code and look at the findings or the compatibility standards. And this is just the purpose statement. We haven't gotten into the details that might give us a little more direction. And Commissioner Blackwelder, did you have anything more to say about that particular purpose statement, purpose and defining criteria?
No, I think it's definitely good enough to put forward.
Okay, then, should we go ahead and make a motion to approve that, or should we wait till the very end, or how should we do that? Or should we just keep going? How do we want to attack this? I almost think we should make a motion to approve A, and then we at least have one section done.
Yeah.
Okay, would anybody like to make the motion? No, I think we've read, and we will just say what was read by our Madam Clerk. So you can just include that in the motion. Okay, I will move that we approve the purpose and defining criteria statement as read by Madam Clerk. And as she read it, do we need to reread it? Oh, no, okay, fine. You need a second? All in favor? Aye. And opposed?
Nay.
E, applicability. Would you like to go ahead and have a little staff report on the applicability section of this, Mr. Kubiak?
Sure. It applies to projects requiring site plan approval. Category 1 site plans are the large, complicated plans that come to the Planning Commission. They would be required to meet these standards. And single-family houses are site plans that come to the zoning administrator, and those types of projects would be required. I think I would add number 4 here that said the approving authority, in other words, the planning commission or the zoning administrator, shall find that each of the compatibility standards has been met before approving a site plan.
So say that again, approving authority.
The approving, and we use that term throughout the code as it is now. The approving authority shall find that each of the compatibility standards is met prior to approving a site plan.
Okay, so as I've written it down, number 4, the approving authority shall find that each of the compatibility standards is met prior to approving each site plan,
Or a site plan.
or a site plan. Okay. Again, the approving authority shall find that each of the compatibility standards is met prior to approving a site plan. That's number 4. Okay, and then, of course, as we look at Commissioner Baralt's, she has removed findings. We want to leave findings in, though. Is that what you're saying, just to make it consistent? She has determinations instead of findings.
Yes, I think it's right. And
So leave
Commissioner Blackwelder
findings
said the
in.
Same thing, and yeah,
Okay, so the only thing that would change from the staff report then would be number 4, which is what I read.
I'll
Does anybody
second the
have any,
addition.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'll second the addition of number 4.
Okay, does anybody have any questions about applicability? Commissioner Rutke, what do you think about applicability?
No, I don't. I like the last statement in particular, and it works for me.
Commissioner Blackwelder,
I agree with Commissioner Reckon.
Commissioner Hahn,
I agree.
and Commissioner Brown? Okay, so let's go ahead and make a motion. Would anybody like to make a motion, which would include number 4? Nobody would make the motion. I will move. I will move B, applicability, numbers 1, 2, 3, and add number 4. The approving authority shall find that each of the compatible standards is met prior to approving a site plan. Do I have we have a second? I'm just watching you write, so I'm not doing anything. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Now we're going to go to administration. Mr. Kubiak.
sure. This provides some guidance on how, in practice, these standards would be administered by the planning commission and the zoning administrator. So each standard is accompanied by a statement of explanation, as I mentioned. They describe what the standard means. It may not be possible for a project to meet every standard because of other regulations or site constraints. Now, in that case, and I know it seems to conflict with the wording of number 4, and maybe we need to make a modification there, but there may be some standards that simply not applicable. It's not enough. When we get, I'm going to review those 7 standards again, and we'll come back to that. Some standards may have greater importance and appropriateness to different development sites and surrounding conditions than others. And in the section, the term neighborhood means, and I describe what the neighborhood means, because we talk about something fitting in with the neighborhood, so it matters how you define what a neighborhood is. And so it's an area adjacent to and extending from the proposed development site to a definable boundary, which may be a major street, an area of significant land use change, or a major natural feature that visually separates one area from another. The planning and zoning administrator shall provide the planning commission with a recommendation as to the boundaries of the neighborhood for the application of the compatibility standards. That's a requirement that's imposed on the zoning administrator, but you could decide that the boundary ought to be somewhat different, but still I have to bring something to you for your evaluation. Neighborhood context is essential for the application of the standards, but the absence of a specific precedent for a proposed development project within the neighborhood shall not be a basis for discounting the standard or for finding the developer has not met the standard. So for instance, if someone introduces a townhouse in the RV project or duplex, which is allowed, you can't say there's not a duplex in this neighborhood, you can't do it. Okay. By the same token, you can't say, oh, that standard doesn't matter. You know, you don't have to meet the standards because you're doing something that's different than the predominant building type. So you don't have to meet the standards. No, you still have to meet all the standards, and you might have to struggle a little bit to meet all the standards, but you have to meet them all. And just because you're introducing a building type that's different from the pattern, it doesn't relieve you of the burden, and you still have to establish a finding of fact as the planning commission. In other words, what you're going to be doing is working to shape that building so it picks up elements that make it compatible with the surrounding. And just to restate, if I come in with a duplex, you can't say there's not another duplex in the street. You can't do it because by right, you're allowed to do a duplex. But if I'm coming in with a duplex, I can't say as a developer, I don't have to meet these standards because I'm introducing something new. No, you still have to kind of make your duplex look like it belongs in the neighborhood. Okay. Compliance with the standards shall not be grounds for not meeting the minimum development requirements and other regulations for this ordinance. So you can't say, in order to meet your compatibility standards, I don't have to meet the critical area regulations. No, you have to meet everything. Okay. Or, you know, in order to do this, I have to cover all of my lot with an existing building because some of the other old non-conforming structures, that's what they did. No, you have to build according to today's standards and meet the compatibility standards. Upon establishing findings with respect to each compatibility standard, the Planning Commission may direct that reasonable revisions are made to the proposed development for its further review and may approve a site plan on the condition that such revisions be made. And that's what you do as a planning commission. If you state your conditions, your concerns, it's incumbent upon the applicant to make modifications to bring their plan into compliance with the standards. And that's what this says. The expectation is if you establish your findings and they're adverse to the applicant has to change the plan, has an opportunity to change the plan and bring it back to you. And then for multifamily housing developments with greater than 8 units in a building, and that harkens back to the building design standards, or I'm sorry, the multifamily design standards. And any non-residential building exceeding 10,000 square feet in size, the Planning Commission is authorized to retain the services of a third-party architectural design review by Maryland Registered Architect of the project's adherence to compatibility standard D6 in this section. The cost of such review shall be borne by the developer. So if it's essentially it's a bigger project, the Planning Commission can bring in architectural review, and D6 is the one standard that is purely architectural. It's the proportion, scale, massing, and detailing of the proposed buildings are in proportion to those existing in the neighborhood, such that the overall effect of new development is to support and reinforce the architectural setting of the neighborhood. So if you find yourself at a loss, you just can't really make sense of the proposal, you need to bring an outside architectural advice in, you can do that. It expressly authorizes you to do that. And did I say the cost was borne by the applicant?
Yes.
Yeah. Good. And lastly, the planning commission may, upon the conduct of a public hearing, recommend that the mayor and town council adopt specific design guidelines as a means to assist in the administration of the compatibility section or standards.
Okay, I think I would like to start with 1A, and go through each one separately, because I think a couple of them I need to have a little bit of rewriting to it because they're a little vague, and some of them need some cleanup on their grammar. So if we could, let's start with 1A. Each standard is accompanied by a statement of explanation to be used by the planning commission or zoning administrator as guidance in applying the standard. Does anybody have any issues with A? I see nobody's, except for probably Commissioner Brown. Then we'll move on to B, letter B. It may not be possible for a project to meet every standard because of other regulations or site constraints. And that, I think, is one that Commissioner Baralt wanted to remove, because it seems as though that one would allow you to just basically allow anything to go, because it gives everybody an opportunity to just say, well, it's not possible, I'll just go ahead and do what I'm just concerned that's a little bit open to objections by anybody, any developer out there. Is that, am I the only one that sees that a little? Well, I know Kathleen actually wanted to omit it entirely. And I agree that it's vague. Does anybody have any other concerns about that?
I would support omitting it if if what Chris was trying to get at was that every standard may not apply to every site plan. Maybe it could be substituted with something that says, if a standard does not apply to a particular site plan, you don't have to write anything yet. I'm just throwing this out for conversation right now. The planning commission can find that the standard is not applicable, but I don't like that statement in B either. So I'm fine with striking it. If there's something that Chris is trying to get at that's not that, I'm fine with adding what he meant.
Yeah, it's kind of dealing with the kind of reality that I experience. Maybe the important part of this is the second part of the sentence. Because of, it's not possible for a project to meet every standard because of other regulations or site constraints. And I guess I was kind of hedging a little bit. There are examples in town where someone has the right to build on a lot, but in order to ensure that the construction takes place in the most environmentally sensitive way, we may set other standards aside and allow the house to be pushed up, and they'll get a variance from the Board of Appeals, but they're sort of move the house out of the wetland or the wetland buffer. So the space they have on which to build becomes much smaller. And as a result, they have to go up vertical. And so they might be putting more vertical mass within their building form than they would if the lot was all open and free and clear. And I was actually going through an experience just like that here in town right before I wrote these standards. So I was kind of reflecting on what would we do if we encounter a situation where the planning commission says, yeah, we need to administer these fairly, and there's no way that you can meet all the requirements because the requirements for code limit you so much. So I that's what this was getting at. However, I could see the hesitancy that you might have, Cindy, especially you, because you've experience with kind of reviewing development projects in a setting like this, and people can take liberty with that. I I guess I was just trying to create a way to give the benefit of the doubt to someone who was handicapped by a difficult piece of ground. But it may be that the standard is the way it's drafted is maybe too forgiving, and maybe the same principle can be addressed in item C. And some standards may have greater importance and appropriateness to different development sites and surrounding conditions, and the other maybe to simply say, and the planning commission may consider the effect of site constraints or other regulations, and leave it at that. So you're not waiving any standard. You're just saying we're going to be fair here. We're going to consider the possibility that other requirements may really put a burden on you, and you may not be able to comply with something entirely. But you still have to meet all the standards. So my second revision here, by eliminating D, we're saying you still have to meet all the standards. We're not forgiving any standards, but you're open to considering that sometimes there are other issues that may that need to be considered.
So you're saying eliminate B
Yeah.
and just allow C to incorporate that by adding some standards may have greater importance.
It may actually, maybe it stands on its own by saying some standards have a greater importance and appropriateness to different development sites. Maybe that's all we have to say. Some things are not appropriate entirely in a site that is so limited by other regulations. I don't know, maybe I would propose striking B and just leaving C the way it is. I've sort of talked myself through this, and I'm just as fine leaving B, but if you have any concerns about B, strike it, and I think D's, or item C is sufficient. So that's the standard was just added?
No, B.
B, you mean
The new.
the one we just added?
Yeah, the one we just added. The
Actually,
the
do you
approving
have-
authority shall find that each of the compatibility standards is met prior to approving a site plan.
So how can you put greater importance on some which suggests that you waive some and enhance others? When in B4, you said you have to comply with all.
I think you have to comply with all of them, but you may enforce one more strictly, or one may compel certain changes to a plan, whereas the other may not.
Can you give us an example of that?
So an infill lot, a vacant lot in the middle of a block in a typical residential neighborhood, there is nothing uniquely interesting about the site or any prominent view or any architectural significance, or no historic tree on the property. So you would not elevate that standard in the level of importance. Whereas the important standards you're going to focus on is making sure that form is compatible in scale and massing with the ones next to it and across the street. So that's kind of how you would do it. And you might say, well, yeah, this basic site with a front yard and 10 foot on each side yard, that's enough. That's all you need to do to blend in with this neighborhood. You don't need to open up this view shed or protect this historic massing of trees that.
Chris, back to your statement, or your statement of if there were some challenges on the lot due to critical area, that sort of thing. What accommodation would we make? Simply backing it up,
or moving it, but not changing the height. I want to get to that point.
Yeah, you could, first of all, you could deny it and say, sorry. And then you have to place, the only way that you can locate this building is to place it within the required front yard. And our code says you have to have 15 feet. Based on that, we have to deny it. So the obvious relief valve is the Board of Appeals. The Board of Appeals approves a variance because presumably, I mean, you won't even approve it. So there's a hardship there, right? So you have to, they would perhaps get a variance and then come back to you in compliance with the variance for your review. And you might then say, okay, this building has a setback to the street a lot different than the houses nearby, right? It was authorized by the Board of Appeals. Now we got to deal with it, right? You're not going to deny the ability to build a house on that lot if it has an approved variance from the Board of Appeals. What you're going to do is try to blend it in as best as possible. So you might require landscaping or trees, or you might require the height of the building to be stepped back to mimic the predominant pattern on the street. Does that answer your question?
And every site can't be built to the same capacity as every other site.
True. Yeah,
I mean, that's just the reality. We don't have to accommodate everything on every site.
You don't, and yet, as long as you have a buildable envelope that is permitted by code, this box,
Right.
you're allowed to build within that. That these design standards say is while you're building within that, you have to do it in a way that complements the whole. In other words, don't put just a big cube that fills up that volume and put a door on it and a few windows and call that a house. Break the mass of that down, maybe a front porch, more windows, sloped roof rather than a flat roof, to make it fit into the pattern of the community. In other words, you can certainly build a big house, but it's got to be a big house that looks like it belongs in that neighborhood.
When I read Commissioner Brault's comments, I think she misinterpreted this, as I think I did too when I first read it. And I think when I see some of the words she put in here, I can see that she didn't understand what you were trying to get at here. I think the word different kind of throws me off. And I'm thinking it should be changed to particular development sites. Some standards may have greater importance and appropriateness to particular development sites. You have the word different, and it kind of throws me into a different idea of what you mean.
I agree.
So I'm thinking the word particular development sites might be a little more specific.
Agree with that. Yeah.
Okay, I think that threw her off because I think she wanted to take it out entirely, and I see now why. So we could change the word different to particular. And then, okay, so when you do that, it says some standards may have greater importance. Now, she wanted to change it to significance, but I don't know.
I like either word.
I think importance is fine here. Some standards may have greater importance and appropriateness to particular development sites and surrounding conditions than other, how about other standards? Because when you say others, I'm a little confused about what others means as well. Can we just say other standards? Can we just clarify what others means? I think she thought other neighborhoods. I think she went into a different direction. Some standards may have greater importance and appropriateness to particular development sites and surrounding conditions than other standards. I think we need to be a little more specific here. Okay, so so far we've eliminated B and we've changed C.
Are we motion for both of those? Do we need to?
I was going to wait, but maybe we should motion some of these because it's getting a little bit confusing now. Let's go ahead and, what do you think about that? Let's just do the whole. I think it'd be a lot, simpler down the road. Let's just continue. D, in this section, the term neighborhood means the area adjacent to and extending from the proposed development site to a definable boundary, which may be a major street, an area of significant land use change, or a major natural feature that visually separates one area from another. The planning and zoning administrator shall provide the planning commission with a recommendation as to the boundaries of neighborhood for the application of the compatibility standards. And Commissioner Baralt made one change, which would be to remove the word change. But I think she misinterpreted it, because I think what you're saying is a land use change. So you have flat land versus a hill, or you have a land, so I think you're talking a whole different thing than she was thinking. Anybody have any issues with number D?
No, but she also had another change. She added the before neighborhood.
Okay, and you don't have the, and I was thinking boundaries of the neighborhood. We could add the, let's add the. Or it could be a neighborhood as well, but we'll make it the. Okay, so we just have one change, number D, which would be adding the word the. Commissioner Rutke, what do you think?
I think it's fine.
And Commissioner Blackwelder?
Agreed.
Commissioner Hahn, you're good with just adding the?
Agree.
And Commissioner Brown?
No comment.
Okay, number E. Now, this one's neighborhood context is essential for the application of the standards, but the absence of a specific precedent for a proposed development project within the neighborhood shall not be a basis for discounting the standard or for finding the developer has not met the standard. This one I was confused on when I first read it until you explained it a minute ago. I know that Commissioner Baralt wanted to remove the entire thing because I think she was considering it a little confusing. It again sounds as though you're giving a pass to somebody that comes in with some good excuses.
No, this is intended so you don't do that.
Right, but I can see what you're saying. I think it was the way it was written that kind of confused me. Neighborhood context is essential for the application of the standards. The absence of a specific precedent for a proposed development project. So you're talking about a function, you're talking of a land use function, or is it any kind of a precedent?
Like I was talking about a duplex, for instance.
Okay,
But
and
it
can we
could be a
use, can we
townhouse
put,
development
can we put
project.
down an example such as,
But it could also be, I guess it could be a modern house. I mean, or, I don't know what, it could be a lot of things. It could be a different land use. And, as part of the purpose statement, compatibility is all about finding that things complement each other even when they're different, So you could have a commercial use that is new in the neighborhood, presumably. Think through that a little bit. And that can't be grounds for saying, oh, these standards don't. You still have to make your commercial use look like it's compatible with the residential neighborhood if you're in the neighborhood.
okay. I now see that. I just, for some reason, I couldn't see that when I first read it.
And if you're the developer, you can't say, I don't have to meet these standards because there's no example of what I'm doing in the neighborhood. No, you still have to meet the example standards, and you're still going to apply each of the standards faithfully. You're not going to discount. You're not going to say that one really doesn't matter because you're introducing something new.
My concern is, without you explaining it to us, there was confusion. Is there a way we can make this more readable?
Yeah, but not here. I would have to report back to you. I think it's complicated. I might have to break it into two sections. If you wanted to approve this tonight, I could probably sit down and think through this.
Well, I mean, since you told me that the town council is not going to even look at the townhouse design until we get this completed, that could be 3 months down the road, and I want to get that going. I mean, I don't know about the commission, but the town council won't even entertain the last thing we did, which is the townhome designs until we complete this, which means we're going to be several months from completing this.
It's just be clear, the town council didn't say that. That's what I was saying.
Well,
We
okay.
want to make sure they go hand in hand
That you wanted
together.
to put 'em
That's-
together.
That's right.
Sure. We were just concerned about getting at least the prior one out to them.
But there's still time. We can work through this language. I mean, I could come up with if you want. I mean, we draft it now. You could approve this, and as a sidebar to your motion, you can advise the town attorney to structure different language to sort of clarify this for you without changing the meaning. I think that's a reasonable request for a planning commission to make. There's other ways of doing it rather than us spending a half hour or an hour
Right.
wordsmithing
Yeah.
this, which I'm
Um,
trying to avoid.
Right, exactly. Okay, and I do think, I see what your needs are here, but, okay, let's continue, let's hold on E, and let's come back to E. Okay, now that was actually 1 through D. Shall we go ahead and motion to approve 1 through D, or should we hold off and wait for that final language to come in? Because it seems as though you're going to need that for the administration, but yet, do you need that for the administration section?
Striking B.
Yes, you're striking B, exactly. But does C, now the C will not,
C stayed the same.
C will not, no, I'm going to say, well, C, I was going to say, does C and E, are they similar in what you're trying to say here? Is C and E similar?
No, I don't think so. I think he says something a little different. It's really important to say. Yeah, I think E says something. My mic wasn't on. I think E says something that's important to be said, and it's something different than C.
I think the approach that was outlined by Mr. Jakubiak probably the best answer. Approve 1A, C with by you, and E. Subject to the advice for clarification.
I think the record is clear about what you meant. I mean, I've said it multiple times about what we mean by item E.
Right.
I mean, and I'm just saying, if you were set to approve this tonight, I will provide the town attorney with exactly my meaning. I'll say exactly what I just shared with you, and we'll ask him to come up with more artful language for the standard
Okay,
without
but
changing the meaning and all.
so you're saying approve E and have you change it? You mean approve E as it is right now? Is that what
Yeah,
you're
if
saying?
you're okay with it, you understand what it means, but
We
the
do
concern is that the
understand, I
public
just
might
don't.
read it like the average citizen may not be very clear. And I was thinking we wouldn't have to spend much more time on this, but we already have. So,
Okay. All right, I think that's the way to go then. Just go ahead and approve all of it, except for, let's go back and through this. C was going to be changed to particular instead of different, and then standards at the very end. So, okay, I will make a motion to approve C, administration number 1A, C, D, and E, with a modification or a change to, for number C, the word different should be changed to particular. And at the end of C should have the word standards. Others, then others, other, instead of others, cross out the S, other standards, period. And then E will be modified by the town attorney. Okay, so let me go ahead and review that motion again. So I move that we approve 1 through A through E with deleting B and adding to C the word particular instead of different, and the word the words other standards at the end of that sentence. And having E reviewed by the town attorney and any questions about this motion before we go? Okay, do I have a second on that motion? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
Let's move on to number 2. Compliance with compatibility standards shall not be grounds for not meeting the minimum development requirements and other regulations of this zoning ordinance. And my only concern is that we have double negatives in here, so it's a little confusing. Can we rewrite that to?
Failure to comply with the standards shall not be grounds for meeting. Shall not be grounds for meeting. No. Compatibility.
Compliance with compatibility standards should not be grounds for failing to meet the minimum development requirements.
Yeah,
Other regulations. of
that's-
the zoning.
yes.
Okay, restate that, please, Commissioner Blackwell.
Compliance with compatibility standards shall not be grounds for failing to meet development requirements and other regulations of this zoning ordinance.
Mm-hmm.
And if you go to Commissioner Baralt, she's included a very detailed number 2, if you notice. She actually wanted to eliminate the staff recommendation on number 2 and include a more detailed one. Did you see that, Mr. Jakubiec?
Yes, yeah.
And what are your thoughts about Commissioner Baralt's
I think
ideas?
every application does go through that. And it's necessary to meet the standards, but it's also what we do in site plan review. So I don't know that it's necessary.
And we include it in number 2? I would, instead of analysis, I would put review, but I don't know if that matters, but I just thought maybe the detail of that would be,
Like it belongs in a different section. This.
but it would be
Or
under
not under
administration.
number 2.
Well, it would be its own. Then you would add a
Yeah.
number 6, maybe. Maybe you'd make it a
Right.
number 6. Do you think it's something that we could add and make it number 6?
Yes.
Okay. 6, and just, instead of analysis, I think the word should be review. I don't know if we want to sit and analyze something. It says every application should include a thorough review of existing, or what do you think? Is analysis better?
Yeah, I like it.
Review or?
No, analysis. I like analysis.
Okay, you want analysis.
Sure.
Sounds a little more detailed, but that's good. Okay, analysis. But okay, so is there any change to any of Commissioner Baralt's number 2?
No, I don't know. We need to say careful evaluation, but it's fine. I think you call something an analysis, you're going to do.
That's gonna be a careful evaluation. We have an
So-
analysis.
But
I say
but,
that's pretty appropriate. Okay,
Yeah.
so we'll make that number 6.
Okay.
And so number 2 is, I think, good with the compliance with compatibility standards shall not be grounds for failing sorry. Compliance with compatibility standards shall not be grounds for failing the minimum development
Failing to meet.
to meet, I'm sorry, failing to meet. The minimum development requirements and other regulations of the zoning ordinance. That sounds a little less. Any questions about number 2, anybody? On Mr. Brown? Number 3, upon establishing findings with respect to each compatibility standard, the planning commission may direct the reasonable revisions be made to the proposed development for its further review and may approve a site plan on the condition that such revisions be made. Any questions about number 3?
I do have one question. Is this where we're saying all the things that the planning commission can do? Because I do want to retain the ability to just like, are we saying that we can only approve and provide conditions and then they can build, or do we have like an ABC? We could disapprove, we can approve with conditions, we can request that they come back to our board.
You have those powers by virtue of the fact that you approve site plans. So you could approve, deny, or conditionally approve a site plan. This just is tailored to your application of this design standards. In other words, you could say, in order to meet these compatibility standards, you would need to plant a buffer of evergreen trees between your house and this adjacent property to buffer that bigger building. And based on that change, we would approve your application. So that's in practice how this works.
Do we need to state that we have other avenues, like they have to come back, or is it
I don't
understood that we can do that as well, or do we need to write it out?
I don't think you need to write it out. I don't think that's the proper place for it either. That's all in the section of the code that talks about the authority of the planning commission.
Okay.
Can I ask? On the second line, it says, commission may direct that reasonable revisions. Who makes the determination of what is reasonable?
I suppose you as the administrative body would, but if your decision were appealed to a court, they would say, was it reasonable that you're asking for the entire building to be 1/4 of its allowable size? And the judge would probably say that's not reasonable.
So-
They set themselves a standard. So you have to, this in some ways constrains your thinking, reminds you that you have to be reasonable in applying conditions. But I would imagine that if this is on appeal to court, then the judge is going to make a determination about whether you were reasonable or not.
So you're saying you don't need the word
I don't think you necessarily do, but I think it's helpful. It's one of those kind of statements that, I mean, you're always supposed to be reasonable.
So we're supposed to be reasonable,
That's
but
the
what,
point. Aren't
like-
aren't we always reasonable? That's-
yeah, so what I might see as reasonable, he might not see as reasonable. So who would we go to? What source would we have that we could confer with, that they could say, oh, this is more reasonable than what you're doing?
You're the deciders. You have to accept that. You're going to make the decision.
Is the word reasonable something that in a court a lawyer could hone in on and it would be better removed for that reason?
I don't know. What do you guys think?
And the reason it's in court is because the commission denied the site plan.
Yes.
So the whole subject of reasonableness is courtroom, whether it's here.
It's true.
Okay, so have we discussed reasonable enough? I'm okay with it. Anybody else on number 3? Let's see, Commissioner Baralt, think,
You didn't have any changes?
I mean, she didn't find any changes on that one, so, okay. Then number 4, for any multifamily housing development with greater than 8 units in a building or any non-residential building exceeding 10,000 square feet in size, the planning commission is authorized to retain the services of a third-party architectural design review by a Maryland registered architect of the project's adherence to compatibility standard D6 in the subsection below. The cost of such review shall be borne by the developer. Is there anybody who has an issue with that? I think we've already talked about that one. And number 5, the planning commission may, upon the conduct of a public hearing, recommend that the mayor and town council adopt specific design guidelines as a means to assist in the administration of the compatibility standards. Any issues with number 5?
No.
I don't think she had any number 5 issues.
Why is there a number 5? We can recommend that to the town council. Don't need a zoning code language to say, to ask the town council to.
Yeah, I agree.
I agree with that too. I also hate to make a motion to remove the word reasonable.
Okay,
I think it might be prudent just because of that legal situation that we might find ourselves in.
okay. Let's go ahead and finish up this section of administration. Does anybody want to be brave and take this on as a motion?
Hold on 1 second, because
Oh, I'm sorry.
after 5 that we're getting ready to delete, we're supposed to add 6, which is inserting Kathleen's 2.
That's, oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. I'm sorry. Number 6 was Commissioner Baralt's number 2. So that would be added to as number 6. That is a good point. And just because I want to complete this thoroughly, she did have 6 through 13 that she wanted to add to this section. If you look on the very back, she had a number of 6 through 13. She had a number of things for, I believe it was under administration. It looks like it was under administration. But there are details that,
And they sound a lot more like standards administration.
they're much more like standards in administration
They are-
anyway. If we're going
they
to
are
consider
very
them, they'd be
detailed
going under
standards.
administration anyway. I mean, going under standards, exactly. So let's put those on a hold. Okay. Who wants to go ahead and make this motion? I will make this motion. I move that we approve C 1 through 6 with the following changes. Delete B. Number C, we change the word different to particular. And after and add other standards to the end of C. Have E rewritten by our town attorney or whoever, our town attorney, I guess. On number 2, change not meeting and change it to not, okay, change the first sentence to compliance with compatibility standards shall not be grounds for failing to meet the minimum development requirements and other regulations of this zoning ordinance. On number 3, remove reasonable. On number 5, delete. And on number 6, add Commissioner Baralt's entire comment. Every application should include a thorough analysis of existing conditions on and adjacent to the site. Analysis,
Period. Analysis should include.
oh, I'm sorry, period.
Yeah.
Analysis should include a careful evaluation of physical properties, special issues at the location, neighboring environment, natural features, visual character. Okay.
Second.
I need a second. Any questions or issues or changes that I didn't get? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Now, it is after 9 o'clock, and I think I promised Mr. Jakubiec that we would end about now, and I think he would appreciate it if we did. So we will have to complete this at the next meeting and perhaps even start on our critical area at some point. Yeah,
Yes.
okay, so I think that will be what we need to start with then next time. Okay. Madam Clerk, did you get all of that? I'm sorry, we kind of threw a lot there for you. Okay, thank you so much. Okay. When is our next meeting? Do we have, it's in February. What, do we know when that date is in February? Okay,
Third Wednesday is the 15th.
Fourth Wednesday.
Fourth Wednesday is the 22nd.
all right. Here's our motion to adjourn.
Make a motion to adjourn.
I will adjourn the meeting to February 22nd, 2023. Thank you very much for coming, and we are adjourned.
Are you sick too?
Just feeling a bit under the weather today.
Yeah.
Thank you for all of your comments. It may not look like we appreciate it, but we do appreciate it.
He makes me think.
Yes, you make us all,